So today I have an extremely special guest. This is a pastor of ours, a great friend of ours and mentor, and someone we just love and respect all around. He's also the leader of Streams Ministries International, who took over in the place of John Paul Jackson after he passed away a couple of years later. So I'm so excited to have him on today because we're going to be talking about the art of listening and all that's entailed with that. But before we get started, we're just going to pull John Thomas in and let him get started with a poem that he wrote, led by the Lord, about the art of listening. Hi, John.
Yeah. Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me first.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Great to be here and honored to do this. So this poem I actually wrote for Streams a number of years ago. We had a contest for poetry about something inspired by the Art of Hearing God class that John Paul wrote. And I chose the section on listening. And so this was my submission that I wrote for that. Listening, quiet, patience, slow to speak. Lay aside myself, my dreams, my hopes, my ambitions and fears, attentive, purposeful, focused on another, seeking not so much to be understood, but to understand, to experience, to live someone else's life. Momentary, yet eternal in my heart, someone else is finally more important than me. Self-searching, I ask, am I able to let go? Things I want, I understand, I believe, I know would help. Am I able to love another truly? Or is it a show, a mockery of love, an insult to their identity? Letting go, being set free, setting another free to be who they really are. No judgments, no condemnation, no expectations that limit. Quietly, it all becomes clear. It's not about me. It's about them. A door slowly opens, and I step into a dream he gave us, where I live for you, and you live for me.
There's so many layers to that.
Yes.
That literally summarizes every place I would love to go with this. So many places to go. I would love to do, I would love to hear the additions that you have to add to the piece in this that's in the Art of Hearing God. Would you tell everyone what the Art of Hearing God is? And that's how I first heard you talk about listening, and John Paul talking about it was through the Art of Hearing God. Would you just tell everyone a little bit about that for a moment?
Yeah. So a number of years ago, John Paul had written this course, The Art of Hearing God, to teach people how to hear God. It was raising up the seers in the church and developing this ability to actually be prophetic and what that really means, and have prophetic anchored in the nature of Christ. And one of the things that John Paul realized is one of the lessons he had to learn with the Lord is he was not really good at listening to others. And so the Lord had to really work with him, and he developed this thing inside of John Paul where when I met John Paul, he was an astounding listener. He'd really worked hard at this. And so he taught the importance of listening, and then the difference between different types of listening, where, sometimes we pretend to be listening, but we're actually not paying attention at all. Somebody can be talking and we're like, oh, wait a second. What did you say? I didn't even hear anything that you just said. We're actually off in our own world, or sometimes we're paying attention, but we only pay attention to what interests us. Or we're listening to the other person, but we're not really listening. We're trying to figure out what we're going to say rather than what they're trying to say. And so our listening is really for our own interest, trying to figure out how to get our story as part of this, or how, oh yeah, I had that happen to me. Let me tell you about my part of that story. But he compared that, or contrasted that actually, with the idea of spiritual listening. And a friend of mine, Pete Scazzaro, he calls it incarnational listening. I don't know if he coined that term or somebody else did, but it's this idea of God becoming flesh so that he can become one of us, so that he can carry our experience, our sorrows, our pain, our sin to the cross and set us free. And as believers, we're called to step into that. And when we're communicating with other people, we become like Jesus, who emptied himself, not trying to hold on to our rights or what we deserve or any of that, but we lay it down to enter into somebody else's world so that we can experience their world with them. And then hopefully from that place, help them discover a path to deeper intimacy with God. And so when we're really listening and spiritual listening, it's not just listening with our ears and what's being communicated, but we're listening with our ears, with our body. We're also listening with our soul. We're trying to connect with what's actually going on in their heart, what's actually going on. What do they really want out of this? But we're also listening with the spirit. We're listening to their spirit, but we're also asking God to help us to truly understand what's being communicated and then what he's saying about it, so that we can represent him in that moment. And when we really do that, there's so much that happens. I've had a number of experiences, because I was not a good listener, but I really developed it because of the art of hearing God. So I've been practicing this for over 20 years, trying to get better at listening. And through that practice, I've had a couple of times where somebody's, sharing something with me, and then I just kind of summarize what I heard them say. And they're like, oh, that's exactly what I was trying to say, but that's so much better than how I would have said it. I gave words to their heart, not just to their words, but actually to their heart. And when you do that, especially as someone that represents the Lord, so you're a prophetic minister, or you're in ministry, or you're in a mentoring place, or maybe you're a parent, you have some type of influence in this person's life, that when you do that, you've actually just presented them a picture of how God loves them and listens to them. And you make them feel known. And that was, one of the kind of phrases in that poem is like, they suddenly have the freedom to be who they are. That we're not listening, trying to figure out how to fix them, but we're listening so that we can love them well, so that we can know them. Now, in that love, we may offer something to help them, or we may not. I mean, it was one of Job's friends' biggest mistakes is they opened up their mouths. If they would have just sat and listened, they would have gotten to the end of Job a lot faster, and they wouldn't have had to come under judgment and have to have Job pray for him, just so that they didn't have the judgment for their miscommunication, because they're assuming all this stuff. They're not actually listening to what Job's saying. They're taking what Job is saying and they're putting it into their own agenda, their own theological bias, and they're judging rather than hearing. And if we can step out of that, and that's one of the big things that the church really needs to learn, is to stop the judging game of you are this, and allow people to be who they are. It's not that we don't have a clear, what's the word I'm looking for? A clear stance on what's righteous and unrighteous. That's not the issue at this point. The issue is the person, that this person is actually a child of God. And if they're in pain or if they're in sin, that means they're held captive by the enemy. And we should, out of compassion, have this sense of desire to help them, not as a desire to beat them up more, because the enemy's already doing a really good job of that. And that compassion puts us in the same place where God is crying out with a broken heart for broken people, trying to call them into life. It says he doesn't take any pleasure in the negative that happens in the judgment that he has to bring to people, but he's longing for that repentance. So we get to step into that. You could tell I'm passionate about this. I keep on talking.
I mean, we can keep listening. That works for me. Works perfectly. We really try here at Fireside Grace to stress, like, for example, we were talking about the overturn of Roe versus Wade in 2018, 2019. The Lord had showed us that would happen. But one of the words that the Lord had me release was that it's not okay to say, I told you so.
Yeah.
It's not okay to gloat or to boast. It's okay to celebrate among like-minded believers. But in front of others, it's a true, I just kept being overwhelmed for the last 4 months leading up to the overturn, that it was a true time of evangelism. Because people are going to be in crisis and not know what to do when they have true life. I mean, a pregnancy, let's just take a pregnancy, for example. It is a crisis. It really is. Even if you're trying to get pregnant, it's still a crisis is just something that shifts us into something else. Yeah. So that can be good or bad, right? Mm-hmm. So it's our job to meet these people where they're at in that crisis and be the light that guides them. Because even though Roe v. Wade was overturned, people are still going to do what they're going to do. And we know that, yes, it's a huge win for our land spiritually and in so many other ways, but also people did it before 1972.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
the importance of listening is crucial to evangelism.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's such a perfect example, because in that situation, we have a principle, and we say this a lot of times in the other way around when we're being attacked. Well, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers of spiritual wickedness in heavenly places. But then we win a battle like that, and we think that we won against a person or people.
Come on.
But that's not who we won against. We won against principalities and powers. And the people that are longing to still see abortion and make it legal, they're victims of a demonic strategy. And that doesn't mean that they don't have free agency. So that's not the issue.
Yes.
The issue is they're deceived. And the thing about deception is you don't know that you're deceived. And we actually should have compassion. I mean, if we found somebody that, was caught in sex trafficking and was raised from a child, and they think that their life is normal. They're a slave, but they think that their life is normal because they've been deceived. They think that they're being cared for by these people that are actually their abusers. And I mean, if you look into Stockholm Syndrome and how that does, when the abuser, there's actually a connection that happens when the abused develops a romantic attachment or some other type of attachment with the abuser in situations. Like they're victims of deception. We wouldn't come in that situation and start beating that person up for their deception. We would come in compassion and try to help them. And the reality is there are people that, some they think that this is okay because of the level of deception, but there's a lot of people that had abortions because they felt stuck and they didn't know any other answer.
Absolutely.
And now they're dealing with the trauma, they're dealing with the conflict, because part of their mind is trying to tell them it's okay, but part of their soul is broken because they know what they've done, and they're dealing with shame, and and they probably have shame from the reason they were pregnant in the first place. And all of this ties in. If we would actually listen to these stories and really practice this listening, and instead of trying to tell people what to think, figure out what they are thinking, we would be in a place where we could help people to come out of deception. But it's got to start from that place of compassion and seeing people as people. And that's one of the greatest gifts that I've learned from developing listening is I see people differently than I did before. Like there's so much value. I look at every person as this treasure of experiences. They have experienced the hand of God, whether visible or invisible. Sometimes it's obvious what God is doing. Sometimes it's not so obvious, but they have experienced the hand of a God in a way that nobody else in all of history ever will. And if I can get them to share their story, I'm going to see something about the heart of my God that I will never be able to find any other place than in their story, than in their interaction with him. And so now all of a sudden, when I'm listening to someone, it's out of that hunger for them, not trying to figure out that hunger for him, that hunger to know him, to know that aspect of their heart and realizing they've got something that I need, instead of coming at it with, oh, I'm the expert. I'm the one that has all the truth. I'm the one that has all prophetic powers. And I'm going to tell you all the great stuff. And, look at me. I'm actually coming at like, I need something that you have. You have a piece of my God that I want to know that I'm not going to be able to experience. Hey, I have a piece of God that you're not going to be able to experience. Can I offer it to you? Let's exchange. We need each other. And that mentality, that mindset, it shifts the dynamic completely. When the whole Roe v. Wade thing happened, got overturned that Sunday, I was at a church, and and it was celebrated that that we that this had happened, and it was a great thing. But I kept on going back, and actually I spoke at the church where I was at. It took me back to when I was 18 or 19, right as I was turning 19, so right at 18, 19, that time period. I was partying at the time. I didn't know the Lord. And my best friend, we partied together all the time. We were crazy. But he comes up to me. We were at a party, actually, drinking beer out of the keg. And he comes up to me, goes, John, keep an eye on me in a couple months. I think I might do something stupid. And I'm like, oh, shut up, man. Have another beer. And I completely ignored it. Well, 3 months later, he committed suicide. What had happened is he was kind of the bad guy. White trash, if you will. I mean, that was the group that I hung out with. That's how I thought of myself at that time. So like we were the bad kids in school, the ones anybody that was decent or, cared about themselves. They didn't want to be identified. Well, his girlfriend was one of the popular girls, nice family and that whole thing. And they were embarrassed that she liked him, but she liked him because he was the bad kid. And she kind of thought that cool thing. She got pregnant, and her parents convinced her to have an abortion because it was his kid. And he could not handle the fact. He was not invited to have a voice in the conversation. He could not handle the fact that his baby was killed, and so he killed himself. Like that's a whole nother side of the story. We need to see all the different parts of that story, but it only comes through listening. Too many times we think we know the whole story. And if we actually think that we know the whole story, we will not really listen to someone else. We'll only listen to somebody else to figure out how to convince them that we're already right, because we've already decided that we're right. And if you want to listen well, one of the things you've got to do is you've got to admit that you may not have all the information, and some of your information might be wrong. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have the humility to admit that, it's a really good time to repent, because pride is what caused Satan to fall. And that is not a good place to stand. We've got to be able to have that humility. And it's not a lack of confidence in the revelation that God has given us. You can hold both of those, one in each hand, humility and confidence at the same time. But that place of humility will allow us to listen well And when we listen well, we actually draw out of people. And it's astounding how just listening to someone and asking questions that you can actually break deception without telling them that they're in deception, because you've actually allowed them to give voice to the things that they were thinking. But because they've never given voice to them, they didn't realize how preposterous it was what they believed.
I love this direction that we have ended up going with this, because I know that, abortion prevention, intervention, and postvention is really near to me. With, I don't say this to boast, but just to confirm what you're saying. I've had the pleasure and honor of working with over 300, 400 women who've considered abortion. And I say women, but families that have been considering abortion. And the Lord has allowed me to be part of teams, and all that we have been able to help save over 200 babies so far. Wow. So we couldn't do that if we were posting on Facebook, people who commit abortions are murderers. Mm-hmm. All of my pastor friends and my friends that I highly regard that are posting this stuff, like, it just makes me so sad, because, like you said, they're already feeling shame. Every single woman, man, mother, parent, whoever involved in the situation that I've ever worked with, out of all of those men and women, it always comes down to one thing. Like you said in the beginning, they feel backed into a corner.
Yeah.
And they're believing some lie.
Yep.
But that lie is literally different for every single one of those cases.
Yeah.
There's the main one is usually financial. That's a, pretty consistent, or I'm not good enough to be a parent. I don't want to ruin them when I can't get out of my own depression.
Yeah.
So to even be welcoming as a Christian, we have to take down our defensive walls that make us feel strong and make us feel proud of our faith and proud to be an American. And not that we're not, but you know what I mean? It's like we get on this train or bandwagon of I'm this and you're this, but all that does is bring division, which is exactly like the definition of what Satan does.
Yeah. 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 I mean, we get to represent Jesus, right? I used the phrase earlier, incarnational listening. He entered our world so that he could identify with what we're going through. Are we willing to enter into their world?
I don't know.
Are we willing to open up our heart, to feel their pain, to feel their shame, to actually hear what's going on in their heart without trying to judge? Because that's hard. It's painful to do that. If we really do that, it's really painful, because we actually get to feel that pain. And most of us, we don't like to feel that vulnerable. And so we hide behind these walls that we create of super spiritual, of I know it all, of moral superiority, of, or a prophetic gifting, or whatever the wall is that we create that makes us seem big in our own eyes. And it protects us from actually feeling. But we've actually got to step into their world and feel that with them and hear that with them. And when you're judging that whole world, you can't actually enter into it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you don't maintain your standard of right and wrong. I mean, that's a different issue than the connection piece. It's not going to where like the world goes, and it takes it too far, because it takes that whole thing of hearing somebody else's story, but then you got to celebrate the story. No. We're not saying we need to celebrate the story. We're saying we actually need to understand the story. We actually need to know the story. We don't need to celebrate the sin, but we actually need to feel the pain. because people do what makes sense to them. And if it's not making sense to us, it's because we've got a different value system. We've got a different belief system. And until we understand why that made sense to them, we're not going to be able to help them to move forward. And the only way to get there is to actually listen, especially when you hear something and you're like, that's just crazy. Well, to them, it wasn't crazy. Most of the time. Now, there is mental illness. I'm accepting that, right? I'm talking about the average person. I mean, we've got, half of the United States that thinks that a certain way of thinking, a certain way of acting is normal. They have a reason for believing that. They have a worldview that causes them to think that that's okay. And we're not going to be able to help them see a different worldview until we actually understand the whys that are underneath of it. We need to understand what it is that makes it seem like that makes sense. There's a phrase that gets said a lot. And I think the first person I heard, Joyce Meyer, one of the best Bible teachers of our generation.
Come on.
She's amazing. I love Joyce.
She's
I think every believer needs to spend about a year listening to Joyce as soon as they know the Lord and get some good foundations and then go on from there. But
especially the battle plan for victory, or the battlefield of the mind.
Battlefield of the mind. Oh man, classic.
I've got it right there.
But one of her phrases, and she's not the only, I've heard a lot of people say this, hurt people hurt people. Yeah. So if somebody's hurting somebody else, it's because they're hurting. Can we have compassion for their pain? We've developed this thing, and some of it's cultural and some of it's biblical, where we identify with the victim. The problem is we don't see that everybody's a victim. Even the perpetrator is a victim. It does not excuse, and being a victim does not excuse sinful choices as a victim. Being a victim does not excuse bitterness, and being a victim does not excuse abusing someone else. There is no excuse for our choices. We're responsible for our choices. So that's not the issue. The issue is there's a reason why. And if we can bring a healing to that place, then they stop wherever their sin is. They can be broken out of that pattern, whether it's the sin of being the abuser or the sin of being of how they respond to being abused. Now, not all abusers or abused people are in sin, but there is a sinful response to being abused, and there's not an excuse for that. We find it so much easier to give an excuse to those that we see as victims. We need to start seeing the whole thing. We are fighting a spiritual battle, and the spiritual battle is for the value system, the worldview. How do we see the world? How do we see God? How do we see ourselves? And how do we see other people? That is the battlefield. It's the battlefield of the mind. We're coming right back to it, right? That's the real battlefield. That's the battle that we're fighting. But if you don't know where somebody is at in the battle and you give them a battle strategy, it might work for some people because you just happen to land on the right battle in the right place. But for somebody else, that very good battle strategy that works over here and it's perfect is not going to work in this situation because you're missing where they're actually at. And the only way to figure that out is to listen. So when we come down to listening, now all of a sudden we're realizing like listening, it's a key to spiritual warfare. Good communication is spiritual warfare. And if you've ever tried to be a good communicator, a good listener, and a good speaker, you realize how much warfare there is. Because all of a sudden you start dealing with your own insecurities, you start dealing with their insecurities, you start dealing with confusion and the twisting that comes in. And they say apples and you hear oranges. And that whole, good communication is spiritual warfare. Good thinking is spiritual warfare. Constantly bringing it back and letting the love of God inform absolutely every part of our lives. The way that we listen, the way that we interact, the way that we talk, the way that everything is informed by the character of God, the love of God, and we become love manifest. And that is actually how we tell if somebody is spiritually mature, because gifting doesn't tell if somebody is spiritually mature, and Bible knowledge doesn't tell if somebody is spiritually mature, and the size of their ministry does not tell if somebody is spiritually mature. How they love people when it's inconvenient tells people who is spiritually mature. It's the ones that are hard to love. When they're loved, that's when you see spiritual maturity. I mean, Jesus said, if you love people that love you, I mean, what better than the Gentiles are you? I mean, they do that. Doesn't mean anything. Now, if you actually want to grow, if you actually want to be spiritual, love your enemies. Do good to those who spitefully use you. Bless those who curse you. That's when you're going to find out if you actually have real spiritual maturity. How you talk about people that you disagree with. When you make fun of people that have a different worldview than you are, you're showing how immature you actually are.
That's right.
When you refuse to listen, when you've already decided that they're wrong, you've already missed it. Like, it's coming back to that place of humility and true love, listening to the heart to get to the root. Because Jesus comes to set an axe at the root of the tree. He doesn't deal with the fruit. He ignores the fruit and goes right to the root. He doesn't clean the outside of the cup. He cleans the inside of the cup. He doesn't deal with the outside actions. He deals with the motives of the heart. Because if you change the motives of the heart, now all of a sudden the outside actions are there. If you change the way that we think about people, we come with that place of compassion. We come with that place of humility. We start seeing the victimization that people are going through. We start to have that compassion that God has for them, and we start interacting in that way. It's unbelievable what can happen. I mean, I've had just conversations that I thought was a normal interaction with somebody, and it changed somebody's life, broke a stronghold that they dealt with since they were a kid. Just from interacting, just listening well, loving them, and honoring where they were at, and correcting them. I mean, I corrected them, and they're like, "How did you do that?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" Like, you just corrected me, but I feel loved. I've never been able, that's never happened before. If we really develop this, what we can do to change the world. I mean, if the church as a whole, if we as believers, if we actually took responsibility for how we loved people, we would change the world. It's interesting, when Jesus told the disciples how to change the world, he didn't tell them to go have a prayer meeting. He told them to go out and love people. Heal the sick, cast out demons, proclaim the gospel. And when they went and healed the sick, cast out demons, proclaimed the gospel, loved people well, then he said, I saw Satan fall like lightning. Wasn't because of a prayer meeting.
Come on.
Because the church was the church. And this is a key element of doing that. How we listen tells you how well you love.
I have a couple of questions for you.
Yeah. Okay.
One, I'm an organizer. So when I think about solving an issue like this, I go back to the roots of it and try to address those so that we can do that. So a big deal just for everyone, and y'all are going to laugh because, I talk about it all the time, is driving. This is a little off topic, but one of the, let's take a small example and then I'll give you my questions. A small example, when Joseph had his feeding tube, there's a lot that you go through that, no one else sees, just like other people go through stuff that no one else sees, but it stretched us to a level that we didn't know we could be stretched. And I was driving one day to the hospital because he ripped his tube out. He was late for his tube feeding, but I couldn't give it. So, and I didn't have any tubes at home. So I had to run into the hospital and get it for him and get him tested for pneumonia again. And, I'm just tired. We were up all night. He was scratching the tape off all night. He kept ripping it out and pulling, and then his face is bleeding and then he's screaming. Then no one gets sleep. And then Asher wakes up. So it's like this cycle. So, it was one of those nights, which was frequent. And I was driving through, a coffee shop. And I wasn't using my brain. I was just tired and trying to get him to the hospital, but I was like, I need coffee to do this. So he can wait, just another second, because I need coffee to survive this. So I drove through and I took just a little bit of liquid, a drink I had in my car, and I just dumped it out on the ground beside my car. But if it's a liquid that like stains anything besides water, that's disrespectful, I think. And I don't even remember if it might have been water, but the lady at the desk, or that was the cashier at the coffee shop, just like completely ripped me up and down for it. Mm. And I'm like just sitting, I was just like, have a great day, but what we need to do as just Christians every day is to remember that you don't know what people are going through. Yeah. We do not know what anyone goes through any day behind closed walls. Yeah. I could look like the strongest leader to some and have a day where I'm super depressed. Mm-hmm. Like we all get that, but we don't, we need to. I think it would help us listen better if we assume the best about people instead of the worst. If we're out driving and someone cuts us off, maybe they were up with their sick baby all night too. Yeah. And maybe they just their cognitive ability wasn't there because they're exhausted from their grandma dying yesterday. Yeah. Or whatever, instead of laying on the horn for 3 minutes, which is my go-to. But the other thing is that to really listen and to not be quick to give advice, but be quick to listen first, is to realize, I think, that we're not in control.
Yes.
I can yell at that car in front of me as much as I want, but that is not going to change.
Yeah.
It's going to make it worse.
Yeah.
My dad put someone through the wall at 7-Eleven before, through the window, just pushed them through the window because they flipped him off and they continued their little fight and chase. Like, that didn't solve any problems. It caused much more problems. And to really listen, I think we have to believe the best. We have to remember that we're not in control. We can pray for them. And that's the best control we have, is to pray for them. But also, I want to ask you these two questions.
Okay.
Do you think that something that hinders our ability to listen well is not taking time to listen to ourselves and what our body's telling us we need?
Yeah, I think that's one of them. I mean, one of the things basic principles about spirituality, it's actually, we talk about this in The Art of Hearing God, this proverb that says that he whose heart is right with the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. So when I come into a situation and I get frustrated and I think that somebody's treating me bad or somebody that's wronged me and it bothers me, my response that I've trained myself to go to is like, well, what's wrong with me? Why did that bother me so much? Why did it bother me that they cut me off? It didn't bother me too much when I cut that other person off yesterday. I mean, I was in a hurry and I had to make a turn. Like they wouldn't let me over, so I just got over. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So so that I'm constantly, I'm thinking about, okay, so what does it mean? Somebody's reacting to me in that way. What is it in me that is allowing that is causing that? What do I need to do? Because, the fruit of the Spirit is self-control, not other control. And so if I want to figure out how to have more peace in my life, that's not going to happen by me trying to figure out how to control anybody else. It's going to happen because I've learned how to control my own heart, my own soul. I brought my own soul to a place of rest. Like David says in the Psalms, that my soul is like a weaned child, like sleeping in the arms of its mom, like that. I want to bring my place where I'm so satisfied in him that I'm in that place of rest. And that is such a key. So I'm going to look at that thing in me. What is it in me that bugs me? When I'm not listening, if I am talking to somebody else and they say something and what I heard is not what they said, I'm not going to figure out why they're communicating badly. I'm going to figure out why I'm not listening well. If I'm listening to somebody and I'm having a conversation and they get upset over something that I said, I'm not going to try to figure out what's wrong with them that would get them so upset. I'm going to try to figure out what was wrong with me. How did I say that in such a way that would allow them to get upset? How did I say it in such a way that the Lord would let them get upset? He whose heart is right with the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with me. Now, I'm not going to do that in a self-condemning way, but I'm going to do that in a very honest way, in a very open way. I'm going to, like David, I come back to the Psalms. They're so helpful. Search me, know my heart, see if there's any wicked way in me. And literally the word wicked is twisted, perverted, something that's not straight, that's not right. Lord, if there's anything in me that's even a little bit bent, that's even a little bit not right, I don't think there is. I don't know of anything, but you know me. Lord, would you show me? Show that to me. And then in another psalm, he says, Lord, keep me from presumptuous sins, from presuming that what I think, that what I know is accurate, and not checking in with you and just doing what I think is right. And that would lead me into sin. Keep me from that. Keep me from any presumption so that I can act accurately. And so, your question, yes, definitely. There's something in me that needs to change. And so my role is, how can I come to that place where I've really dealt with my own heart, where I know what's going on? I need to be aware of what I'm thinking. And so one of the practices that I've developed is, we think as Christians, we get allergic to certain concepts. Like, I'm a Christian, I don't get angry until I'm angry, but that's, ignore that. Or I don't get sad because, I'm full of faith. So I don't ever get sad.
Right.
Except for when I'm sad.
Yeah.
So I've actually developed this habit where I ask the Lord 4 questions. And actually, this is another one I learned from Pete Scazzaro in his book, Emotionally Healthy Discipleship. So good. But the first one is Lord, what am I mad about? And I just sit and listen and write down. Lord, what am I sad about? And I sit down and I listen and I write it down. Lord, what am I glad about? I sit down, I listen, I write it down. And then, Lord, what am I fearful or anxious about? And again, I write it down. And I'm not trying to figure it out in my own self. I'm asking him to show me. And I'm processing with him. And I'm not trying to excuse, I'm not trying to ignore, and I'm not trying to justify. I'm just being honest to know what's going on in me. And then I invite him into that. And sometimes I'm mad because I should be mad. But I'm afraid to admit that I'm mad because I'm a Christian. I don't get mad, and that whole weird thing that we get into. But God gets angry. It's clear in Scripture. It says it again and again. Actually, it talks about the wrath of God more than it talks about the love of God in Scripture. That's another point for another time. Leave that one alone.
We'll leave that there.
I'll just say this just because there's an allergy against this. The only reason someone gets mad is because they love. You only get mad when something that you love gets threatened. And so if you don't get mad, you don't love. So anger is actually just a way to figure out what you love. What you get angry about tells you what you love. When you get angry when somebody talks about your image, you love your reputation. So it's just a barometer. So we should be getting angry. We should just be getting angry for the right things, like God. Anyways, so, just looking at those things and inviting him into that place, then when I'm having a conversation with somebody else, I've already developed this habit of being aware of what's going on in me and what's mine. So I can identify what's me, and then I can identify what's them. And they're talking, and then I can say, well, I got a question. Well, what are you anxious about right now? Oh, I'm not anxious. Well, have you keep on thinking about something that you haven't been able to figure out? Well, yeah, I just don't know how this is going to happen. Oh, okay. Maybe I won't tell them, well, that actually is anxious. That's exactly what I was talking about. But I just pull it out of them. I start to ask them questions and help them to discover it, help them to bring it to the surface. And then all of a sudden, it's amazing how once they start to talk about those things, if they have a relationship with the Lord starts to give them answers, and they come away from the conversation with peace. I haven't given them any answers. All I've done is help them to discover what's going on in themselves, bring it to the light. But Ephesians chapter 4 says that those things that are exposed to the light become light. And so once they get brought out into the light starts shining on them, they get changed into light, and it transforms the dynamic. And that's what we're doing in listening. So I've got to do that to myself first, because if I haven't dealt with the log that's in my eye, I'm not going to see the speck that's in somebody else's eye. But the point of that is once you've dealt with the log that's in your eye, then you can actually see the speck that's in somebody else's eye. Yes. And that's not, excuse me. Bless me. Thank you. That's not so we can deceive ourselves and think that we don't have any logs. That's that place of self-honesty. If I can actually be honest with myself, then I have the right to be honest with somebody else. If I can't be honest with myself, I have no right to be honest with someone else.
That's so good. So we have several viewers here who are life coaches or are life coaches for us. So that's one of many reasons why I wanted to do this interview, is because I see immature coaches get frustrated with, well, I give them advice and they're not doing it, so it's not working. And so they're still having the same issue. Yeah. But the issue is not them not doing the advice. That the issue is probably goes back to one of these things. What am I mad about? What am I sad about? What am I glad about? Or what am I fearful or anxious about? It probably goes back to those. So I encourage any of our life coaches or anyone in a position of influence over anyone, even if you're a dog mom, to think about what am I fearful about, sad about, mad about, or glad about. Because if we can go back to, I'm not trying to control them, I'm only here to show them God's goodness through the journey that he has them on. And as prophetic people, it's really such a benefit to be able to hear Holy Spirit and how to guide people. But that leads me to my last question for you that we have time for, I think, today. Because my favorite thing that I took away from this whole section in the Art of Hearing God on listening was, and this is not to condemn anyone, but it's to reality check us on where we're at. Our ability to listen to one another really reflects how we listen to God. Yeah. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. Well, we are images of God, right? And so how we interact with other people is an image of how we interact with God. And so because of that, we can actually find out the way that we listen. If we get frustrated when somebody interrupts us, when we've got our own thing, we're really busy, we're trying to accomplish, and then somebody interrupts us when it's inconvenient and we refuse to listen, we just ignore them and go about our agenda, That's probably exactly what we do with God. There's probably a lot of times when he's inviting us into conversations, but it's inconvenient. We sat down, we gave him 10 minutes to answer our question because that was our quiet time, and he didn't answer us. So we're going to go about our business. And then 2 hours later, when we're in the middle of doing something, he wants to talk to us. We don't have time for that. And we do that without even realizing that we're doing it. But if we're really honest, it is true. There is a major principle in Scripture, and it gets reduced to one aspect of it, which is not untrue, but it's only one aspect of it. And it's called seed time and harvest. It's a major principle in Scripture, but it has to do not just with how we often use it to talk about giving and what that means, but it actually talks about our emotional health and our life. It says that in James, basically, it says the mercy you don't give is the mercy you don't get. If you don't sow mercy, you're not going to receive mercy. If you don't sow listening, you're not going to find yourself listening. You've got to sow seeds of listening to reap the ability to listen well. And so we're constantly sowing into our spiritual life and sowing into our future by the things that we're doing now. And we don't realize that the things that we're doing right now, they're actually affecting where we're going to be at 5 years from now. We think because we don't see an immediate reflect. I mean, we did something and it wasn't that big of a deal. Nothing really happened. It didn't really hurt anything. We don't realize how much it affects 5 years down the road, which is exactly what the writer of Ecclesiastes said. I always forget which verse. I think it's 8:11. But it says that because the sentence on an evil deed is not executed quickly, the hearts of men run to do evil. We think because we got away with something, we didn't see how it hurt anything in the immediate, in that day, that week, that month, that year, that it wasn't that big of a deal. But 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we're going to be reaping what we're sowing right now. We're deciding with our actions how we choose to listen to people. We're deciding the ceiling that's going to get on our prophetic gift. The ceiling on our prophetic gift is set by how we interact with other people. If we're able to hear God when he speaks through people that we don't value as much, it will be determined by how we listen to kids. How do we actually notice them? Do we actually value them, honor them? Do we see them? Are we interacting with them? That's going to determine whether or not we're going to hear God when he speaks through somebody that is maybe less mature, or maybe doesn't have the same place of authority that we do. How we treat those that are in authority over us is going to determine whether or not we're going to be able to hear God through people that are in authority over us. How we think about them, how we talk about them, especially people from the past. I mean, one of the what's the word I'm looking for? 10 Commandments. That's the word. It's a popular word. I should be able to remember that. One of the 10 Commandments, but Paul says it's the only one that came with a promise. Honor your father and mother that it may go well with you in the land, that you may live long in the land that the Lord your God has promised you. That this is actually a spiritual principle. How you honor the people that discipled you, your first pastor in the first church, when you came into the Lord, how you talk about them and how you honor them is going to determine how long you can last in your destiny. The problem is some people, they grow out of that, quote unquote, right? Maybe they were discipled in in an evangelical or in a Bible church, and now they've gotten into the things of the Spirit, or something along that lines, and then they start talking badly, they start judging and then they wonder why they never really last in their destiny, where things open up, but then they don't ever last very long. They opportunities, and then they fade, and they just don't seem to get any traction. Well, that's the reason why. How you listen to the lessons that you learned in your past determines what you're going to receive in your future. And so you're always sowing and reaping. And listening is a key thing. How you listen to people. If you can listen, I can't tell you how many stories. I've heard dozens of firsthand stories of people that have encountered angels that came as homeless or extremely poor, not looking good type of people, dirty, smelly, weak, old, whatever, unlikely. And they were actually angels. And if they wouldn't have paid attention to them, they would have missed it. And there's a story, and I'll end with this. I'll give it back to you. But there's a story out of Anthony the Great. He was one of the first desert fathers in the 4th century. Well, he was known for having visitations from the Lord Jesus. And one time that he was, this community of believers that were seeking the deeper things of God, they've come around him. He was known for, his authority in the spiritual realm, prophetic visions and different things. And so, this community began to develop around him. And the community says, Anthony, you've seen the Lord. Would you ask the Lord that we could hear, that we could get to see the Lord? And so he prays and he goes, tomorrow, and I can't remember what the time was. I'm just going to say 5 p.m., 5 o'clock, we're all going to go to the top of this hill. And if you go to the top of the hill, you'll see the Lord. And so the next day, everybody starts walking up this hill. They're all excited to get up to the top of the hill. And, they're getting up there early because they're going to meet with Jesus. Like they're finally going to meet Jesus. And, as they're walking up on the side of the path, there's this old man that's just sitting there, in the dirt. And he's like, where are you guys going? Oh, we're going up to the top of the hill to meet with the Lord. Oh, I would love to meet with the Lord. And, then the next person, where are you going? Oh, we're going to the top of the hill to meet with the Lord. Oh, I would love to meet with the Lord. And finally, Anthony, he's elderly. I think he's in his 80s by this point. He lived well into his 90s. He's in his 80s at this point. He's walking past this old man, and the old man says, where are you going? He goes, we're going, going up to the top of the hill. We're going to meet with the Lord. He goes, oh, I would love to meet with the Lord. He says, well, here, let me help you. I don't have much, but, I can pull you on his back. And so he gets this old man that, couldn't walk. And he grabs his arms and leans over and is, holding his weight on his back, bending over, and is going to carry him up the hill so he can meet with the Lord too, because, Jesus had promised to meet with him. And as he starts to walk up the hill, this man gets heavier and heavier. And finally he collapses under the weight of the man. And, he rolls over and he looks, and it's Jesus. And he says, they were so busy trying to meet with me that they missed me. And he disappeared. And Anthony walks up to the top of the hill and sits there. And after a while, everybody's getting embarrassed. They're like, what's going on? I thought you said Jesus. We were going to see Jesus. We were going to meet with Jesus. He goes, you did. He says, we didn't see Jesus. Did you see the old man that was on the side of the road? Well, yeah, we saw the old man, but we never saw Jesus. And no, that was Jesus. And he told him what happened. See, how we pay attention to the least. If you've done it to the least of these, you've done it to me. If you've done it to the least of these, you've done it to me. If you've listened to the least of these, you've listened to me. If you haven't listened to the least of these, you have not listened to me. And how we listen is sowing seeds that determines how we hear.
I think that will leave everyone thinking for a while. It's really good. One of my favorite things that along those same lines that I've heard you say that you did is go to the zoo and just to meditate on how each animal brings out a different aspect of God. So I actually did that this weekend.
Oh, nice.
And I love that. And when we stop and realize that heaven is around us, we can understand how close God is to us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that we're never alone.
Yeah.
So I just want to speak to everyone listening that, well, thank you for listening. You're good listeners. But we are so thankful that you are here, and we just want to acknowledge you and everything you're going through. If there's anyone here going through anything difficult, which might be all of you, that we want you to know that the Lord hears what you're going through, and every single detail of it is important to him. And I just pray that you experience the Lord in the way that you need to experience him, to know that he is with you throughout your battle. Thank you, John, so much for being here. I encourage each of you to go to Streams Ministries International. What is your website, John?
It's streamsministries.com.
Okay. So you can go there. I will link it in the description once we get this video posted later today, a little bit later today, where I'm going to repost the video. I'll post every link to what you guys have to offer in our description. I encourage you to go support Streams Ministries. They are seriously after purifying the prophetic in this time and helping people live loved and to love other people and just to build a community in which we can bring wholeness back to the body of Christ and clarity to the world through that. So please go like John's Facebook. He has Johnny Thomas Facebook page. He is the dream guy. So if you want your dreams interpreted, go follow him as well. Also, John is going to be doing his first in the States live teaching of the art of hearing God for the first time in several years here.
Yeah, like 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. So that'll be at Streams.
It'll be in Kerrville, Texas. So I'm going to be down in the hill country in the beautiful part of Texas.
Okay.
And it'll be in September. So beautiful time of year to be down there. Love for you guys to come.
Yeah. So I'll figure out how you guys can sign up for that as well if you're interested. Thank you so much for being here. And I really hope that we get to do a part 2.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. And I love you guys, you and Robin. Just thankful for who you are.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you.